Okay, how's everybody doing? Let me just make sure I'm live here. Um, Trying out a different streaming platform today. So let me see. Let me just adjust my fix my camera here. Okay. Okay, yep. All good. How's everybody doing? Yeah, leave comments in the chat on Twitter X if you guys are watching there. Um, really appreciate it if you do that. Want to keep the conversation going and make sure that we're being interactive here in what we're doing. Um, but yeah, so how's everyone doing? Hope everyone's having a good week so far. Definitely a ton to get into. Excited to be back at it. Really looking forward to all the topics we've got today. Obviously, we have a Super Bowl that is set. The Seahawks and the Patriots will be in Super Bowl 60. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Obviously, we'll talk about the Yankee offseason and kind of my final thoughts or somewhat final thoughts on the offseason as we're kind of in the home stretch here of the offseason. Not really sure there's going to be many more moves for the Yankees for the rest of the offseason. And obviously there's about 2 weeks to go until pitchers and catchers report. We'll also talk a little bit about the Giants, who of course, have been in the news recently because of John Harbaugh starting to build out his coaching staff. He obviously hired a defensive coordinator and a special teams coordinator. Offensive coordinator, as we found out today, is going to be a little bit more of a process with Todd Monken taking the Cleveland Browns head coaching job. So we will discuss that as well. Um, but yeah, so let's get into it. Let me just make sure here. Okay. Yeah, all good. So I just kind of wanted to give my final thoughts on the Yankee offseason. And, there's been a lot of discourse going around the last couple of days about the Yankee offseason and, what grade would you give the Yankee offseason and all those things. And, it kind of seems with the way things are going that the Yankees are pretty much done adding to their roster. Maybe they bring in a depth bat. I know that Jack Curry yesterday on Yankee Hot Stove was talking about maybe that the Yankees would still be interested in a Paul Goldschmidt reunion. Not quite sure if that's going to come to fruition, but it's going to be maybe a small move like that, maybe a depth bench piece, maybe a bullpen arm. It doesn't seem like the Yankees are making any more real additions to their roster. And I think that when you look at the Yankee offseason, I think that people will sit there and tell you, oh, you should be more optimistic about this team. This is a team that won 94 games last year, and they're bringing back a lot of their key contributors from last year. And look at all the guys that are going to get healthy. They're going to get Cole back. They're going to get Rodon back at some point. All these things. It is okay though to not be a fan of this Yankee offseason, right? It's okay to basically say, listen, this offseason was not what we expected it to be. I think when we got into this offseason, there was a lot of different paths that we thought that the Yankees could maybe take, and they ended up basically just running back the same team. And make no mistake about it, the Yankees are running back the same team next year. I know Brian Cashman was speaking today trying to be like, well, we've got young guys coming up and we've got guys coming back from injury. The Yankees are running back the same team as last year. Now, that team was good, right? That team won 94 games. That team was obviously in the divisional round against the Blue Jays. That team was tied for the American League East. They obviously lost due to a tiebreaker to the Toronto Blue Jays. But that team was good. But the Yankees are running back that team. And that was a team that they're running back that was not good enough, not even close to good enough, to make the World Series last year. Lost in 4 games to the Toronto Blue Jays, kind of got ran out of the building in that series, as we know. So was it the correct strategy to run back a team that last year, I think every single Yankee fan kind of watched and said, that team has some flaws. That team's not, some juggernaut, right? It's a good team. It's a solid team. It's a fine team. but I wouldn't say that it's a team that is this over-the-top great team. And the Yankees decided to run it back. And, I was thinking about this. Gone are the days of the evil empire, right? I mean, we are completely a long way away from those days. Look, and all you have to do is look at the Dodgers. The Dodgers last year, they win the World Series. They've won 2 World Series in a row. They go out and they add Edwin Diaz, who was arguably the best bullpen arm on the market. And they add Kyle Tucker, who was pretty inarguably the best offensive player on the market. This is a team that's won the last 2 World Series, but they still have a desire to get better. They still have a strive to go for 3 straight championships, to go for 4 straight championships, whatever. They are leaving no stone unturned. And it just feels like the Yankees are content. 16 years, no titles, but they're content. This isn't your grandfather's Yankees. This isn't your father's Yankees. This isn't the George Steinbrenner Yankees. This is a Yankee team that last year was a wild card team and is running back that exact same team. Really with no major additions. Ryan Weathers they brought in as a depth arm. I'm not even sure if he's going to be in the rotation late in the season when guys get healthy. The Yankees are running back the same team that was not good enough, and you have a team like the Dodgers, who beat you, mind you, in the World Series a couple years ago, that is willing to do everything in their power to win a championship. And it just feels like, and has felt like for many years, the Yankees are not willing to do whatever it takes to win a championship. And that's a shame. That is an absolute shame as a fan base who has not experienced a championship in 16 years and who remembers the glory days of the late 90s and the dynasty team. To watch the Dodgers go out and sign the best reliever and the best position player on the market when your team was unwilling to do basically anything this offseason. So that's really disappointing. And, I think it's okay to be disappointed in the Yankee offseason. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think it's a C+ offseason. Maybe a B- offseason if they're able to get a bullpen arm. Right? But they didn't upgrade the starting rotation. They didn't upgrade the bullpen. And they brought back the same lineup. Now, that lineup was great last year, right? But to me, it's a C+, B- offseason. And I expected more from the Yankees. And I think it's a little bit of an underwhelming offseason. I don't think there's any problem with saying that. Let's pivot now. Just make sure. Sorry about that. Let's pivot now to the NFL playoffs. And obviously, we have a Super Bowl. The New England Patriots and the Seattle Seahawks will play in Santa Clara in about a week and a half in Super Bowl 60. And this wild NFL season will come to a conclusion where there's new blood in the Super Bowl. No Mahomes, no Tom Brady, no Josh Allen, no Lamar Jackson, no Joe Burrow. None of those high, no Matthew Stafford. None of those high profile names are in the Super Bowl. It's new guys. It's Drake May, second-year quarterback. And obviously Sam Darnold makes the Super Bowl. And Sam Darnold has an unbelievable story, and we're going to get into it. And what I thought would be good to do today is to rank the 5 teams that should have the most regret watching Sam Darnold play in the Super Bowl. So who are the 5 teams, 1 having the most regret and 5 having the least regret for watching Sam Darnold play in Super Bowl 60? And some of these have, obviously, I wanted to rank 5 to kind of make it a round number. But let's get into it. So number 5 is the Cleveland Browns. And I ranked the Cleveland Browns here because in the 2018 draft, when when Sam Darnold came out, the Cleveland Browns had an opportunity to draft Sam Darnold number 1 overall. And of course, they drafted Baker Mayfield, who, amazingly enough, as we'll get to, there's a lot of connections between Baker and Sam, even in the NFL, that we will get to. But, Cleveland had an opportunity to draft Sam Darnold number 1, and they didn't. Now, again, it's very hard to kind of, you can't look at the past and say, well, if the Browns drafted Darnold, they would have been better off than drafting Baker. I mean, Baker did unbelievable things in Cleveland until he was kind of ran out of town, he did amazing things in Cleveland. He was able to resurrect a team that was 0-16 to, I believe, like a 7-9 or an 8-8 record that first year he was there. So, I think it's hard to say Cleveland has a lot of regret, but they're fifth on the list. Number 4 is the New York Giants, who were picking second in the 2018 draft. And again, not too much regret because, you could say you have regret for not drafting any quarterback. You could say, well, every time Josh Allen wins a game, the Giants could have had him. It's hard to do that for every single player that you don't draft in the NFL draft. But the Giants had an opportunity to pick Darnold in a year where they, pretty much needed a quarterback. Eli was at the end of his career, and the Giants certainly could have taken Darnold. And as we all know, they took Saquon Barkley, and the rest is history. But the Giants and the Browns were the two teams in the 2018 draft before the Jets that had an opportunity to select Sam Darnold and have him be their franchise quarterback. And both teams passed on him before the Jets obviously took him at 3. Now we get into the teams that really have regret. And I think this is really each team. I think it's a pretty fascinating situation. And I think it's informative to kind of go through the backstory of how this happened and how everything kind of went down with Sam Darnold's career after he left the Jets. So the number 3 team on this list is the Carolina Panthers. And the Carolina Panthers, I think, are a little bit of a sleeper pick. I think they have more regret than you would think for what happened with Sam Darnold. So let's kind of go through the timeline. So after the 2021 season, Sam Darnold is traded. After the 2020 season, Sam Darnold is traded to the Carolina Panthers from the New York Jets. The 2021 season, Darnold starts the whole season. He's the starting quarterback. He missed some games due to injury, but he's the starting quarterback. And I believe he went 4-7 on the season that year. So, he had a losing record, but he was their starter in 2021. Fast forward to the next season. And the 2022 Carolina Panthers are pretty hysterical because Matt Rule got fired 5 games into the season. And Steve Wilks, who was actually the Jets defensive coordinator this year before eventually getting fired with the Jets, he actually took over as the interim coach that year. The Panthers QB room that year is hysterical. Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, and PJ Walker was the QB room. So Sam Darnold and Baker Mayfield, the number 1 and number 3 picks in the 2018 draft, were in the same QB room. Now, Sam Darnold obviously suffers a high ankle sprain in training camp, and Baker Mayfield starts the season. And Baker Mayfield's the guy. Baker Mayfield plays 5 games. The team's 1-4. He gets injured. And the Panthers don't go to Darnold. They go to PJ Walker for like 5 games. And Walker, I think, goes 2-3 in his starts. And then Baker comes back. It was a disaster of a season. Then Baker comes back for 1 game. He's ineffective. And Baker then is benched by Steve Wilks. And Sam Darnold takes over the last 6 games of the season. And when you look at the numbers in the last 6 games, it's actually funny. Darnold was actually good. He played well in those 6 games. I believe he threw 7 touchdowns and ran for 2. So he had 9 total touchdowns to 3 picks and had a 4-2 record. So he was pretty good. But kicked to the curb at the end of the 2022 season. And obviously then San Francisco signed him to back up Brock Purdy. And then we know he went to Minnesota and the Jets and obviously the Seahawks. But the Panthers had Sam Darnold in their room. They traded for him. They traded a 2nd-round pick for him, right? They had him in their room. He struggled his first year, but his second year he went out and was good. He went 4-2 in his last 6 starts, 9 total touchdowns to 3 interceptions, and he was still let go by the Panthers. So to me, when you look at the Panthers and where they are currently, obviously Bryce Young is a decent quarterback, but I don't think anyone's really saying Bryce Young is some can't miss QB. I think there's some regret from the Panthers, some real regret when they watched Sam Darnold in the Super Bowl because Darnold was on their team and was good for the Carolina Panthers when he played in that second season. Now we get to the Jets as number 2. And obviously, the Jets were the team that drafted Sam Darnold in 2018. And there's multiple areas of regret for the New York Jets with Sam Darnold. Darnold in the 2018 season, his rookie year, really had a strong rookie year. He came on strong at the end. The last 5-6 games of the year, he played very well. But then Todd Bowles was fired as the coach. And the Jets obviously had to bring in a coach that was going to mentor Sam Darnold. And who did they hire? Enter Adam Gase, who obviously was one of the worst coaching hires in the history of the New York Jets, which is saying something. That they have some really bad ones. Shout out to Rich Kotite and everybody. But they hire Adam Gase, and it's a disaster, right? The 2019 season doesn't go well. The 2020 season, famously, they start 0-14 or 0-13. Sorry, they start 0-13, I believe, before winning that game against the Rams. And then they won one other game and they finished 2-14 to get the number 2 pick instead of the number 1 pick. And the number 1 pick would obviously turn out to be Trevor Lawrence, and they end up drafting Zach Wilson. Now, the second area of regret for the Jets is, so the first area of regret is that they didn't coach the kid up. They brought in Adam Gase, who was a disaster. He'll never get another job in the NFL. And the second area of regret is that they traded him away. They traded him to the Panthers for, I believe, a 2nd, 4th, and 6th round pick. And they drafted Zach Wilson. And that was the end of it. And I think that, there's a school of thought, obviously, that, well, you give a guy 3 years, you know what you have. What I would say to that is, and we've seen it as Giants fans, is, if the Jets gave Darnold that 4th year, and obviously we know that the Jets under Robert Saleh, they did have some talent on that roster. They obviously had, an extremely good 2022 draft where they brought in Breece Hall, they brought in Garrett Wilson, they brought in Jermaine Johnson, all those guys. It would have been very interesting to see if they gave Sam Darnold the 4th season where he was still under his rookie contract, obviously. How would the Jets have been able to be a playoff team? Because they were fairly close with Zach. I think they were 7-4 one of those years. So they got close under Saleh to making the playoffs, even with the poor quarterback play that they had. We know Zach Wilson was a disaster, but if Sam Darnold was that team's quarterback for 2022 and 2023, would things have been different? So that's the second area of regret for the Jets. So they traded him away, and they had an era that followed it where all they needed was good QB play, right? And they would have been probably a playoff team. But instead, Sam Darnold was on the Panthers and then the Niners. And then obviously he went to the Minnesota Vikings. And the number 1 team on this list is the Minnesota Vikings. The Minnesota Vikings, if I was a Vikings fan, I would be pissed as all hell watching Sam Darnold in the Super Bowl next Sunday in San Francisco. The Vikings last year with Darnold went 14-3. Now, for context, the Giants haven't won 14 games in a season in 40 years. It's very hard to win 14 games in a year. It doesn't happen that often. Very difficult. And they won 14 games last year. If they had won the last week of the season against the Lions, they would have been the number 1 seed in the NFC playoffs. They go 14-3, but obviously they lose that last game to Detroit, and then they have the debacle in the playoffs against the Rams, I believe. And they let Darnold go. And the reason they let Darnold go, obviously, was because of J.J. McCarthy. But as we have now seen, J.J. McCarthy, really rough rookie. I mean, not even his rookie year, his second year, because he missed the whole first year due to the meniscus injury. His second year in the NFL, 11 touchdowns, 12 picks, like a 35.7 QBR, which is the ESPN quarterback rating metrics. Not a very impressive season. Now, again, is J.J. McCarthy going to be a bust? No one can say that after 10 NFL starts. But the reality is Sam Darnold didn't get a massive payday. Sam Darnold got a 3-year, $100 million deal from the Seattle Seahawks. A deal that the Seahawks, now obviously they're not going to get out of the deal because the guy might win the Super Bowl. But if Sam Darnold was awful this year, the Seahawks could have gotten out of that contract after the 2026 season. There was an out in the deal after year 2. So even if you wanted J.J. McCarthy to be your future. Look at what Green Bay did with Jordan Love, right? Jordan Love, I believe, sat 3 years or 3.5 years. And I know that's not the norm, but it's also not the norm to get rid of a quarterback who wins 14 games for your franchise. And when you look at the Vikings, with Brian Flores in that defense, with Justin Jefferson, with Jordan Addison, with Hawkinson, with the two great tackles they have, that team is ready to win now. And they had a quarterback who was going to be playing in the Super Bowl on their team last year. And now he's not on their team anymore. And they've got to hope that J.J. McCarthy develops into as good of a quarterback as Sam Darnold. And there's no guarantee that he will. So to me, the Vikings should feel a ton of regret watching Sam Darnold in the Super Bowl, more than any other team. So yeah, that's the I thought that would be fun to do. The Sam Darnold the Sam Darnold sadness rankings, if you will, for teams that should feel regret that he's not their quarterback. And obviously, it'll be really cool to see him in the Super Bowl. I mean, as someone who obviously played in New York, with the Jets, and now he's got a chance to play on the biggest stage. And we'll talk more about the Super Bowl next week, obviously, when the game is that coming Sunday. Couple other football things, and then we'll close with the Giants. A few rants that I kind of want to get in here. The first one is the weather on Sunday in Denver. And obviously in Denver for the AFC Championship game, the weather was very, it was normal for the first 2.5 quarters of the game. And all of a sudden, as you're watching on TV, you're like, holy cow, this is getting bad. Basically, there's like a snowstorm out of nowhere in the middle of the third quarter of the game. Everybody saw it, obviously. The conditions completely changed. No one could move the ball. No one could see the yard markers. Jim Nantz is like, we don't know what the starting, field position is. We'd be guessing. No one could see. No one could move the ball. It was a disaster. Obviously, no one could kick field goals, the whole 9 yards, right? And this led to some just ridiculous discourse on social media and on talk shows and whatever. Oh, we got to ban outdoor playoff games. Oh, put every playoff game in a dome. Are you kidding me? Put every playoff game in a dome? So, first of all, as a general manager, your edict, right? Your job description is to build the best team for any circumstance, for elements, for good weather, for dome, for cold, whatever it is. Your job description doesn't say build the best team that can win in a dome. I love how people were saying like, oh, you don't know who the better team was. Watching teams play in perfect conditions, I don't think tells you who a better team is. It tells you that they're better in perfect conditions. But it doesn't tell you that, it doesn't. It says a lot about a team when they're able to play in bad weather and they're still able to make the most of it, as the Patriots did on Sunday. Is it the most aesthetically pleasing thing to watch? No. But the idea that some of the greatest moments in the history of the NFL took place in ridiculously cold weather. You ever hear of the Ice Bowl? You ever hear of, in 2007, the Giants playing in negative 30-degree wind chill against Green Bay? You think those were ideal conditions? Some would say it probably was worse than the snow because the freezing cold, you can't catch, you can't kick, can't do anything. Should that game have been played in a dome? You don't think that it added to the drama of a game that it was played in the elements, that it was played in Mother Nature? We can't abolish everything, right? We can't remove every hurdle, right? Sometimes you got to suck it up and just play through it. It's the NFL. It's football. It's played in the elements. It has been for the last 60 years. You want to put every playoff game in a dome? First of all, logistically, you couldn't even do it because it just wouldn't work, right? And what are you going to do? You're going to take away the home field advantage of teams? Like, it doesn't make any sense. It does not make any sense. And it's an asinine talking point to say, well, we should move every single playoff game. We should move every single playoff game indoors. It makes no sense whatsoever. It's just a stupid talking point, to be honest with you. So that's kind of my takes on the here and now in the NFL with obviously Darnold and the Patriot Bronco game on Sunday. Couple more things, and I wanted to get into the Hall of Fame because the Hall of Fame has been in the news recently because Bill Belichick, who obviously is won 7 Super Bowls as a head coach with the New England, or won 6 Super Bowls or whatever as the head coach of the New England Patriots, and obviously won 2 Super Bowls as a defensive coordinator of the New York Giants in 1986 and 1990. He did not get the necessary number of votes to be a first ballot Hall of Fame. And look, I can sit here and everybody watching this is educated. Everybody watching this knows that Bill Belichick is obviously a first ballot Hall of Famer. But I wanted to kind of talk about the meaning of the Hall of Fame. The Hall of Fame is meaningless. The Hall of Fame has become meaningless. And I think this is kind of a microcosm of society where, like over the last 5-6 years, people stopped, kind of, the whole like alternative facts phenomenon. People kind of stopped like watching the news, and they kind of, they went to their own sources to find their information, and they stopped listening to people on the news, and they stopped listening to people talking down to them and saying, this is what you should believe. And they just basically said, I'm going to believe what I want to believe. To me, it almost feels like the Pro Football Hall of Fame and Hall of Fames in general don't even need to exist anymore. Everybody can look at Bill Belichick and say that he's a Hall of Famer. We don't need some people on a committee like Bill Polian, who's a bitter, just a bitter curmudgeon at his age. We don't need people like that dictating what we think of these athletes, these coaches. And quite frankly, no one, it doesn't matter. No one is changing their opinion of Bill Belichick. You guys want me to rant about Eli Manning? I'm not gonna. So Eli Manning didn't get in the Hall of Fame. He's a Hall of Famer, right? It doesn't matter that these, bureaucrats on a board are not going to put Eli in. It just, to me, it's starting to become meaningless. The Hall of Fame is starting to mean nothing. And it's a shame because it used to be, I think, a beautiful thing that you could kind of use it as a benchmark. Like, hey, is this guy a Hall of Famer or is this guy not a Hall of Famer? And that was used as a benchmark for greatness. But at the end of the day, what does it mean? Like, what does the Hall of Fame even mean if Bill Belichick, who's one of the greatest coaches of all time, is not a first ballot Hall of Famer? Who is a first ballot Hall of Famer then? And to go back to my point, I don't think it matters anymore. Like, I don't think people care. I don't think people care anymore. I really don't. I don't think people look at Bill Belichick and say, he wasn't a first ballot Hall of Famer. No one's going to remember that. No one's going to look at Eli Manning and say, remember when it took him 6 years or however long it's going to take him to get in? Remember when it took him 7 years to get into the Pro Football Hall of Fame? No one's going to say that about Eli. They're going to say, hey, do you remember that game in San Francisco? Hey, do you remember that game against the Patriots in the Super Bowl when he led a game-winning drive and when he made that throw to Manningham, one of the greatest throws in the history of the Super Bowl? Like, I don't think we need these people on panels, whoever they are. I don't think we need these people to tell us who is a Hall of Famer and who isn't. I guess that's just my take on that. People are obviously ranting and raving about it. Oh, how could you not put Bill Belichick in the Hall of Fame? But I just don't think it matters anymore. And I think it maybe in 5 years, it's a shame because, I've visited the Pro Football, the Pro Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. I love the history of sports. I just don't know in 5 years if we're going to even be talking about this anymore because it just feels so meaningless now that it has lost all its luster. And, it's just ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. I mean, Bill Belichick's not a Hall of Famer, really? I mean, you think people are stupid? You think anybody actually believes that? So that's my take on the Hall of Fame. 2 more things. The Giants we'll get into. But one more thing on the NFL that I wanted to talk about. The Patriots, with their win to go to Super Bowl 60 and play the Seahawks, they proved that And we hope as Giant fans that this is, our future with hiring John Harbaugh and everything that's transpired the last couple of weeks. The Patriots proved that hiring a head coach is the most important thing in the NFL. It's as important as a franchise quarterback, and it's more important than everything else. Because when you look at that Patriots team, they were a 4-win football team last year. And this year they went 14-3, and they're in the Super Bowl. In 1 year, they turned around their entire franchise. And you know what? Drake May is a hell of a player. Drake May, I believe, is going to be a special quarterback in this league. But the reality is they had Drake May last year. The difference between the 2 years is one man, and it's Mike Vrabel. Mike Vrabel is a top 5 coach in the NFL. And Mike Vrabel, again, proved that more than any other sport, a head coach can truly change your fortune in the NFL. It's different in other sports. It's different in the NBA. It's different in baseball. It just is. But in the sport of football, if you have the right coach, truly anything is possible. If you have the right head coach, you can go from 4 wins to the Super Bowl. And that's what the Patriots did. So just wanted to mention that because I thought it was informative to kind of discuss the coaching, how the coaching job that Vrabel has done. I think he's done an amazing job. Let's get into the Giants now to wrap up the show. So a lot of news for the Giants, and we'll try to hit on all of it. So John Harbaugh obviously has started to build out his coaching staff. He hired Dennard Wilson as a defensive coordinator. We will get to him in a minute. He hired Chris Horton as his special teams coach, who he has a connection to. He's been with him in Baltimore for many years. And he was going to hire Todd Monken as his offensive coordinator, but unfortunately, the Browns did not let that happen. And the Browns today hired Todd Monken as their head coach, which was a big surprise. I mean, Cleveland's search was bizarre. It looked like they were going to hire Jim Schwartz for a while. They ended up going with Monken. And unfortunately for the Giants, Monken will obviously not be their OC now. And, we'll start with the offensive coordinator hire, but more of a big picture take before we get into the nitty gritty of it. When you hire John Harbaugh, you hire him because he can pick coordinators. And he can pick coordinators really freaking well. John Harbaugh, in 18 years in Baltimore, had 7 offensive coordinators and 8 defensive coordinators. 15 different offensive and defensive coordinators combined. And it didn't matter whether it was, Marty Morningweg, whether it was Mark Trestman, whether it was Rex Ryan on the defensive side, whether it was Wink Martindale, whether it was Zach Orr, whether it was Mike McDonald, who's in the Super Bowl for the Seahawks, whoever it was, John Harbaugh, 18 years, 1 season with less than 8 wins. So he knows what he's doing. And when you hire a coach like John Harbaugh, though, you need to hire good coordinators. And it's incumbent upon Harbaugh to nail these hires because John Harbaugh is not Sean McVay. John Harbaugh is not Sean Payton. John Harbaugh is not sitting there with a play sheet. That's not who he is. That's not the coach he is. So John Harbaugh needs good coordinators, of course. And the reason why you hire John Harbaugh is because you trust him to pick those coordinators. So for as much as we might have some consternation about, Todd Monken went elsewhere, or, is Dennard Wilson a good hire? We do have to trust John Harbaugh because he's done this before. 15 different coordinators on the offensive and defensive sides combined in his time in Baltimore. And he didn't miss a beat. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty of it. Dennard Wilson is hired as a defensive coordinator. Contrary to popular belief, Dennard Wilson is the guy that John Harbaugh wanted. A lot of people said, he didn't get Jim Leonard. It was his first choice. Guys, Jim Leonard hasn't even been hired by another team. It was reported by Ian O'Connor that Jim Leonard and Dennard Wilson were neck and neck. They were 1A and 1B. So, and the fact that the Giants hired Dennard Wilson and the fact that they're not waiting for Jim Leonard, who, again, has not been hired by anybody. He's still taking interviews. Okay? So the idea that he was his first choice, I don't really buy that. I don't really buy that. I think he wanted Dennard Wilson. I do. And I think Dennard Wilson is an interesting hire. I put it on Twitter that Dennard Wilson needs to prove it to me. And the reason I say that is because he's only been a play caller for 2 years on defense with the Tennessee Titans in 2024 and 2025. And those defenses statistically were not great, right? Obviously, points per game, very bad. Bottom, I think, 5 in the league in his 2 years in Tennessee. Now, again, there's some numbers that are positive for Wilson as well. For instance, in 2024, they were second in yards per game. Now, you ask, how were they second in yards per game and 30th in points per game? A lot of it was the offense turning the ball over, short fields, and all those things that led to the points per game. But the reality is, Dennard Wilson did not have great defensive numbers in his 2 years in Tennessee. What I will tell you is this, and I'm not defending the hire. I'm simply saying that we have to trust John Harbaugh. That's my overarching take. But what I will say about this hire is, if you look at Dennard Wilson prior to the 2024 season when he took the Tennessee Titans DC job, Dennard Wilson was one of the hottest defensive coordinators on the market. He had a very good background. In 2022, he was the defensive backs coach for the Philadelphia Eagles. You might remember that team played in the Super Bowl. They were a top 10 defense. The year after, he was the defensive backs coach for the Baltimore Ravens. They were the number 1 defense in the league, scoring defense. His track record, coaching defensive backs and being on really, really all-star staffs, led him to being one of the hottest DC candidates on the market 2 years ago. And again, some of the, luster, he lost some of his luster when he went to Tennessee and had those 2 years. But again, there's context that needs to be involved. As I said, he was second in yards per game in 2024, which is very good. Obviously, the points per game wasn't good, but he was good in yards per game. And I trust that John Harbaugh, who recently hired Mike McDonald, who is coaching the Seahawks in the Super Bowl in 10 days, I trust that if he put his foot down and said, I want Dennard Wilson, I'm going to trust John Harbaugh. Now, again, it's a big task. The Giant defense is vital to next year's team because they were the reason this year's team wasn't any good, right? The Giants were bad this year on defense. They were actually good on offense with Mike Kafka and Daboll. So again, that's Dennard Wilson. Do I love the hire? Am I in love with it? Am I sitting here telling you he's the next Buddy Ryan? No. But I think there's reason to be optimistic about that hire, and we just have to wait and see. The offensive coordinator one, to me, is a little more unsettling. And obviously, Todd Monken, we understand Monken's one of the best offensive coordinators that's out there. He's been a top, 10 offense the last 3 years in Baltimore, and he's going to be the head coach in Cleveland. It's going to be interesting how this process plays out because the Giants have basically been operating under the assumption that, look, Todd Monken's our offensive coordinator. It's going to be Monken. We'll do a couple sham interviews, and then we'll hire Monken. That's what the Giants basically were planning to do. Now, I think you have to completely reopen the search. You should look far and wide to get the right guy in here because Jackson Dart's development, I'm telling you, is going to be paramount to this team's success in the future. His relationship with the offensive coordinator, Dart's relationship, is going to be as important as anything that happens with the Giants over the next 3 years. When you look at the track record, there's been a lot of names thrown out for who could be the offensive coordinator. Davis Webb, who's like he was obviously playing 2 years ago. He's a rising star in the industry. He was the quarterback coach or something in Denver this year. He's been thrown out there. Charlie Weiss Jr., who was the offensive coordinator of Ole Miss when Jackson Dart was there, so they have a connection. His name has been thrown out. I do think it is informative, though, to look at the coordinator hires he has made in the past, particularly on offense. Out of the 7 offensive coordinators that he had in Baltimore, 5 of them had previous NFL head coaching experience. 5 of them. And the 6th, Todd Monken, had college head coaching experience. The only coordinator that he had in Baltimore that didn't have prior head coaching experience of some kind was Greg Roman, who obviously we know Greg Roman got fired by his brother Jim Harbaugh about a week ago because the Charter offense couldn't move the ball in the playoffs. So when you start naming these hotshot candidates, the Charlie Weiss Jr.'s, the Davis Webbs, the Nate Scheelhaus, I saw people, the Rams, quarterback coach or passing game coordinator, whatever he is, whatever his title is, right? When you're looking at candidates, I would look at candidates that have previous head coaching experience. I think that is going to be something that he probably covets in this hire. And the guy that checks that box amongst the candidates that have been listed, the guy who checks that box is Cliff Kingsbury. Cliff Kingsbury, of course, was the head coach of the Arizona Cardinals, and he made the playoffs with Kyler Murray. Once that went bad, he was fired, and then he became the offensive coordinator of Washington. Washington, of course, was in the NFC Championship game last year. This year, it went bad, and Dan Quinn fired him. But look, Cliff Kingsbury is a hell of an offensive mind. Really is. Would I want him head coaching my team? No. But we're not talking about head coaching. We're talking about offensive coordinator, running the offense. Cliff Kingsbury has NFL head coaching experience, and he has experience calling plays. Something that Davis Webb has no experience calling plays. Davis Webb has been holding a clipboard in Denver, learning under Sean Payton. Now, that's a really good start, learning under one of the best offensive minds in the game. But is it enough to give him full autonomy of an offense that, again, is going to be vital to the Giants' success? Because you are coaching a second-year quarterback who clearly needs to develop. So to me, and again, I have no sources. I think there's going to be I would assume there's going to be a thorough source here, a thorough search done here. To me, Cliff Kingsbury might be the candidate for the Giants offensive coordinator position. Now, again, he's coveted by other teams. The Ravens want him. Jesse Minter with the Ravens wants him. And obviously there's a bunch of teams that want Cliff Kingsbury. But again, speaking from, looking at the data, 7 offensive coordinators, 5 of them had NFL head coaching experience, and 6 of them, including Monken, had some kind of coaching experience prior to becoming offensive coordinator under Harbaugh. So that is the criteria I think he's looking for. So it's going to be interesting. Listen, this is a big hire for Harbaugh. This is, to me, the first test of the Harbaugh administration. Can he make the right hire here? And can he pivot from a guy who he pretty much thought was a lock to join him in Todd Monken? Can he pivot and make a really good hire here? Because he has to. Because it's incumbent upon him to make a really good hire, because Jackson Dart's future, I hate to exaggerate, but Jackson Dart's future depends on it. It really does, because John Harbaugh is not an offensive mind. John Harbaugh is a football coach. So the offensive coordinator is going to have a lot of autonomy in running this offense. So that's my take on the Giants coaching search. Obviously, we will see what happens with how that kind of plays out. So that's about it. Appreciate everyone joining. Really appreciate all the support since I started doing these live streams and stuff on November 25th of 2025, and it's been about 2 months. And again, I really appreciate the support and everyone kind of sticking with me and showing me love during this process. So really appreciate it. Anyway, follow me on social media, Chris NYY28, Chris _NYY28. Appreciate everyone being here, and hope everyone has a good rest of their week. And I'll see you soon.